Okay, trends and issues in botany, plant science in general. Mostly this revolves around erosion, environmental degradation, things we would put on plants in order to make them grow, sometimes not awesome for the environment, such as fertilizer and pesticides. So adding environmental impact and the degradation to the cost of growing plants is currently being discussed. So right now, if you own some ground, if you have a garden, you may grow those plants and sell them however you want. Barring it be actually illegal, and very few things are, you can put as many chemicals on them as you want, and you can use as many resources as you want. There is really not a lot of regulations in this area. You can, erosion is obviously not encouraged, but there's not a lot of enforcement into many of these areas. Crops are commodities that are exchanged for currency. So essentially you're trying to make money. So the more money you make, if you make more money by putting on more fertilizer, that's exactly what you're going to do. And this is traditionally how classic economics of supply and demand have determined the cost of crops. You pay for the corn, and the farmer gets the money for the corn, and he plants corn next year. It doesn't actually reflect the cost of environmental impact and degradation. We see this example most in the tropical rainforests, right? You see people just cutting down the timber. They don't make any money on the forest. What they would make money on is if they could grow coffee or chocolate or cotton or corn in those areas, and they are not getting paid to have a tropical rainforest. They're getting paid to grow cotton and corn and things like that. So it has been discussed trying to include the cost of environmental degradation into the cost of plants. Sloping topography, things like this, accelerate erosion, it removes topsoil, and it's up to the individual landowner how they want to proceed with that. These and other issues have led to the concept of sustainability. So by definition, sustainability is not only what is good at the moment, but what is good for future generations. So not only how much can you get for your corn right now, but what would be good for your children to have in terms of that land in the future and future generations. It takes into account what is actually going to be, how you're going to be able to use that land 100 years from now. Maintaining a sustainable crop system actually requires stable crop and environmental relationships. It requires you to maybe take more care of your soil and potentially not remove trees from the rainforest, because that ecosystem, actually the soil in the rainforest, is truly terrible. You would think it was great because of all the amazing plants that grow there, but as it turns out, the plants themselves are what is the cycle of nutrients, if you will. So when you remove the plants, it actually also removes the nutrients from that particular soil type. And even if you clear cut the forest, you're looking at 3 to 5 years of crop production, and then you will remove all the nutrients from the soil and it will just be barren. So it's not long-term sustainable to cut down rainforests, but yet there's not another way in which we can pay people for leaving it that way. There are some things like shade coffee and shade chocolate. There are some plants you could grow in between the forest that are very interesting and kind of gaining popularity because it means you can potentially get paid for keeping your forest and also get paid for a crop. The study of this is called agroecology. It's a growing field. It's really fascinating. I've started to sort of stick my little toe in some of this, and it's very interesting to think about botany on a more global scale. We also have to think about the potential energy costs that are accounting for production. So crop ecosystems require energy and resources, fertilizer, energy for tractors, a lot of input goes into each crop. Using energy to determine the accurate value of crops has been suggested. So instead of just a price, you would pay how much energy units go into each of the plants that you are buying for either to plant in your yard or to eat. Production cost would be determined by how much embedded solar energy, or emergy, is in the crop. It sounds like I've misspelled energy. I have not. It's actually emergy, E-M-E-R-G-Y. It's a real thing. So here is the schematic kind of Emergy. Basically, all forms of energy can be equated to solar energy. So this is Emergy is the way that you could kind of attach a number to how much energy goes into a particular type of crop and get some kind of economic threshold for how much should be charged. So here's the Emergy idea. Also, the real value of commodities has dropped drastically per acre. So what this means is if you were farming in the 1930s, 1950s, 1960s, even early 70s, you're making quite a bit of money. Now the cost of inputs, the cost of fertilizer, the cost of fuel, the cost of genetically modified seeds, you can imagine the cost per acre has gone up, but the price of corn has stayed roughly the same since 1970. So you're making less per acre, and so the value of the commodities has dropped. The number of farms has stabilized at about 2.1 million, which is not very many. There are fewer and fewer. Most families don't farm. It's not a family farm. It's more of a corporate farm. Many conglomerates will buy farms and just have it managed by someone, but they are not, in fact, it's not a family passing it down. Full-time farm workers has massively decreased. 10% of farms provide 70% of the production, and finding people to work on these farms is increasingly difficult. Labor in agriculture is extremely hard to find. You can see this is the operation. This is just milk cows. So if you were a dairy farmer in 1970, you had maybe 100 cows, and that was a lot. But there were about 650 to 700 farmers with about 100 head of dairy cows. Now you have maybe 100 farmers, and each one of those has about 600 to 700 cows. So do you see how now we have less farms, but they're corporate, and so they're doing more things. Profitability helped a little bit by diversified crop use. Now we can get ethanol from corn, we can get tofu from soybeans, we can sort of diversify where these things are growing and how we are using them, especially ethanol is helping move the price of corn. Urban population has increased, the rural population has decreased, so cities are getting larger. I'm not sure cities are getting larger, but right outside cities are getting larger. So the suburbs are getting larger, communities attached to larger cities, but the pure rural areas are getting smaller. Rural areas are usually slightly more viable if they're close to an urban center. So Wentzville is a lot more viable than if you just keep going towards Kansas City. There are some areas that aren't near enough to a city, so they're much smaller. You can see that whole urban to rural as you go from St. Louis. You get more and more rural, and then you hit Kansas City and you start to get rural communities that are closer and attached to urban communities, and it's a lot easier for them to function. Suburbia has created problems, including loss of farmland. So arguably some of the best soil in the world is near Chicago, near Indianapolis, near St. Louis. And those are urban centers. And a lot of that, you'll notice, is also going into wind farms and solar farms. So we're not able to grow plants on those, and they are instead being used to fund the urban area. But that is creating a situation in which it makes it harder and harder to grow profitable crops because the good soil and the good land is being used for urban areas. It has alternatively created some interesting spaces for plant-based enterprises. Golf courses are everywhere, landscaping companies, gardening centers, pick-your-arm farms. Eckert's, again, is a great example because it's close to St. Louis. People can go out kind of to the country in Belleville or Grafton, or I think they have another farm somewhere, and you can pick your own apples or pick your own peaches, and you can do things on the farm, and you can buy directly from them. And so that does help a bit. Again, pick your own strawberry places are very popular. Pick your own produce is very popular in general. Increasing population means the population shows signs of stabilizing at about 9 billion people by 2050. Energy is projected to rise nearly twice as fast as the population. So we might be able to feed the population, but maybe everybody is not going to have the same possibility for energy.